I think I might have ruffled some feathers when I said that Call of Duty World at War Zombies might be aging poorly. In case you hadn't seen my video about the game in its zombies mode, my basic point about World at War is that while bringing us the original mode and being one of the greatest titles in the franchise, and one of my personal favorite games of all time for the game that it was at the time that it came out, I acknowledge that nearly 20 years later, all these years after its launch, it feels to me that there's less and less reason to go back and boot it up in the context of everything else that we've gotten after it, and that some of the mechanics of the game may have aged poorly. I think that opinion settled, rightfully so, like a lead brick at the bottom of the world's deepest lake. A ton of people flooded into the comments and said, you know what, you're wrong. This is a terrible take. This game's still the greatest of all time. These maps are awesome. The guns are fantastic. The mechanics are just too hard for a casual, unskilled loser, and you must just suck at the game. And to that I say, you are completely valid, and I get why you're upset. I didn't acknowledge any of the good things about the game, so I want to shift the narrative. Was I too harsh on World at War? Honestly, I think I was. In making that video, I forgot to acknowledge some of my favorite things about this game while being overly critical of its age and the clunkier mechanics in comparison to some of the more casual, friendly, easier, and more fast-paced go style COD games that we've gotten in recent years. I forgot to take in the nuance of what was so great about World at War and why so many people still love it today. So let's talk about some of the greatest things about World at War, and maybe a retrospective on why some of my opinions about the clunkier mechanics of the game might have ruffled the wrong feathers about one of the most beloved entries in the COD franchise. First, I do need to stand on my take about the mechanics of this game. I fully stand by the fact that it's a clunkier and mechanically less pleasant game to play in comparison to some of the newer games. That being said, my favorite game is Black Ops 3, which is a much later down the line Call of Duty game in the grander context and history of the franchise, one that does feature much quicker paced, snappier, movement-based mechanics, and it's less grounded in reality, quite literally so. It's not unreasonable to say that the more slow-paced, sluggish mechanics of World at War lend less to the way that I personally like to play the game, but everyone's different, and that's just my personal playstyle. World at War absolutely holds a special place in my heart as a more difficult, but in a good way, and more challenging, again in a good way, version of Call of Duty and of zombies as a whole. One of the biggest things that I don't like about the mechanics of this game is being windmilled by a zombie and getting downed on round 3 trying to knife a zombie through a barrier. Given that this game had a 2-hit down system and every hit slowed the player down pretty aggressively, it was really easy before unlocking any perks to essentially be killed by the game's movement system alone and not your own ability to dodge, weave, and decouple yourself from a zombie attack. So mostly when I talk about the mechanics of this game being a little bit clunkier, I'm talking about some of the weird nuance that you have to remember when playing this game that otherwise you wouldn't expect from a regular FPS game, or some of the mechanics that have been forgotten in the newer style Call of Duty games that we've all been playing for the past 20 years. So it's easy to forget that Call of Duty used to be rooted more as a milsim style game than it was as an arcadey, rapid-paced shooter that it is now. Most of my original take comes from recalibrating the brain back to the original game, especially in the context of someone like myself who's going back and making a lot of these videos back to back and feeling the differences between drastically different entries in the COD franchise. Just takes a second to get used to them again. It's not a fault of the game, it's a fault of the player. And after a bit of extra time, I did get used to it again. You learn how to work around the game's mechanics by just remembering that they're a little different than they are now. That doesn't mean they've aged terribly, although I have learned that my preference is the newer style. It's just an opinion. And of course, it is a game from 2008 after all, so I don't expect it to feel like a game made in 2026. And I think a lot of that nuance was lost in my original retrospective on World at War. I'm not faulting it for the game that it is. It's a very fun, very capable, and very enjoyable Call of Duty game. I even went back recently and got max level in multiplayer and completed the entire campaign, because I truly do think this game stands as one of the greatest of all time in terms of COD games. But I also really like a lot of the newer mechanics from new COD games. Things that make them a little more arcadey, a little bit more replayable, and more mindless and casual. Games are games. I like going back to old story-driven games every so often and enjoying the story. I also like playing newer games that are easier, quicker paced, and simpler because they're exactly that. I can shut down my brain after a day of work and play an hour and not feel like I'm making a bigger investment into it. So I personally might just be a weirder cross-section of player. I'm not a fan of the super fast-paced mechanics when they're put into COD's multiplayer, but I love them when they're added into zombies because those faster-paced mechanics allow me to play a quicker and more full game, as somebody who over time has become more of a casual enjoyer of the mode that I grew up loving. And on the flip side of that, a lot of the slower mechanics that I'm criticizing in World at War Zombies, I absolutely adore in its multiplayer and its campaign. That slower pace that I'm actually looking for when I go back to play those specific modes of World at War. Now, something else that I also got a bit of flack for saying was that the game would be best redeemed by getting a remaster or a remake. And again, it's something that I think was lost a bit in my retrospective. I'm not saying that World at War isn't good because it hasn't been remastered or remade. I'm saying that I love World at War, and I think it deserves a new audience and a new round of players appreciating the game that it was and the game that it is. A game with a phenomenal story, a game with great zombies maps, and the game that introduced this awesome mode to the broader COD franchise. Games being remade, in my opinion, only help boost the original version, and they help bring more attention to the game that we all remember and love. Look at how much fun people have been having the past few weeks playing Black Ops 1 and 2 again on modern consoles. And those are just ports of the games, not even visual remasters or versions with improved mechanics and gameplay. If we simply got World at War brought forward to a new audience, there'd very likely be a vocal group of people that join in on the crowd that say it's one of the best of all time. Now imagine that same group getting a visually remastered, beautified version of that same game. I don't see any harm in that, and that's exactly what I would love to see. This game features 4 of the greatest maps of all time with Nacht, Verrückt, Shinonuma, and Derice, and they can all equally argue to be in the top spots of the best maps ever remade. They're some of my personal favorites, and they were instrumental parts of my childhood and my early enjoyment of FPS games overall. They introduced us all to the Zombies mode, the game that did a lot of heavy lifting in bringing something unique and something truly different and special to Call of Duty, and that absolutely cannot be ignored. I don't want to erase the history of the original game in my original video critiquing how the game has aged. Nothing about how great this game was will ever diminish it, but it's also perfectly healthy to look back at a 20-year-old game and say that it's got some dust on it, and some things about it could have been better, especially now looking back in the context of 20 years of improvements on the franchise and changes that have been made to the core Call of Duty game. Now that being said, if we give Activision the keys to the kingdom and say go remake this game, they're going to add a battle pass, they're going to add a store, they're going to add wacky skins, and that would ruin World at War. I would love to just see it remastered and brought back to us in the visual fidelity that a game in 2026 can bring, so that we can all enjoy this game in the modern era on modern systems. That would be ideal, and that's the point I was making in my original video. Now I don't want to turn this into some big feedback and response video because that's not the point of this. The point is to talk about the things that make World at War great in contrast to some of the things that I said made it show its age. Something that I equally got a lot of comments about is how simple this game is. And yes, while this game does lack a lot of the creature comforts that we've become accustomed to in the more recent COD Zombies games, I want to settle it here and now. The simplicity of World at War absolutely is its strength. It's also a weakness if you're looking for something more feature-filled, but of course the newer games exist. You can still go play those if you want more of those features, and you can absolutely enjoy those newer games if you want to, and the changes that have been made if they're your preference. I know it's mine because some of the newest entries like Black Ops 3 and Black Ops 7 are some of my favorites of any Zombies game that Treyarch has ever delivered. But in that same vein, you can still go back and play the more simpler COD games like World at War because you enjoy its simplicity, and that's not a drawback. That is a huge positive of this game, that a more simple version of Zombies still exists for you to go back and play. It's very basic. There are 4 perks, there's a handful of guns, there are effectively 2 wonder weapons, maybe 3 if you count the flamethrower, there are 4 straightforward maps, there's no overbearing main quest pop-ups and dialogue trees and parts and buildables and unlock mechanics for things like power and pack-a-punch, just a power switch and some teleporters. And there's no gobblegums, no multi-pack, nothing. It really is true to form, bare necessity Zombies survival. And in itself, that is a beauty. It's one of the greatest things about World at War. And while you can take it as a criticism, as I did in my original video, you can also take that as one of the best things it's got going for it. A Zombies purist or a fan that just wants to play boiled down, simple survival, or someone who hates all the frills and nonsense added to the newer games can absolutely go pick up this game today and get the most core, simple, straightforward Zombies experience possible, while still enjoying fantastic maps, interesting characters, satisfying weapons, and a true actual challenge, even if some of that challenge, in my opinion, comes from the mechanics and quirks of the game itself. And another major piece that I didn't cover and absolutely should have, because it does absolutely give this game a ton of replayability and is arguably the strongest thing going for it aging better than it is aging poorly, is the modding community. It's something that I give a ton of credit to Black Ops 3 for, and something that I should absolutely be giving credit to World at War for. It gave the community the freedom and creativity to make Zombies their own, and it all started with World at War. Maps that we all loved, made by fans of the mode. I still remember playing maps like Cheese Cube, Wendy's and McDonald's, a giant pirate ship map, even some fan recreations and modern maps, before I could even afford to pick up Black Ops 1. The community around these custom maps with YouTubers like Yodislaya and NGT Zombies gave me somewhere to enjoy Zombies with others very early on into the mode's existence, and I can never forget that. That's a huge positive, and I absolutely think that lends to it aging much better than I gave it credit for. So to sum it up as simply as I can, I do not hate World at War. I don't think it's a bad game by any means, and saying that it aged poorly is not a criticism of the game itself. If you go back to 2008 and ask me what I think about World at War, I'll tell you it's one of the greatest games of all time. Go back 10 years to when Black Ops 3 was in its main life cycle, I'll tell you World at War is still one of the best COD Zombies games ever made. And if you ask me today in 2026 if World at War is still a good game, I will tell you yes. Even if I add the caveat that I like some of the features added in the newer games more now for different reasons. World at War deserves its place hung up in the rafters with its jersey retired. It's a fantastic game, it's the founding father that brought Zombies to Call of Duty, and it deserves all the praise that it gets. But in my opinion, it's also perfectly fair to be a little bit critical of the things we love. It doesn't mean we hate them. In fact, I think it shows how much we love the original that we're willing to call out any of its flaws, and some of the things we like more about its successors. So let me know your thoughts. Is World at War one of the greatest COD Zombies games of all time? Is it okay to acknowledge its flaws and faults while still saying it's one of the best? Do you agree with the things that I love about this game? game, or even some of the things that I don't. Drop me a comment and let me know your thoughts. And if you like this style of video and want me to do more of them, also let me know. Drop a comment and a like, or maybe even subscribe. It helps a ton. That's all I've got for now, and I'll see you in the next one.